Hello, Heero here, and today we're gonna look at Fugue, an insane super break support that combines the Exo toughness mechanic with her insane supportive utilities to allow allies to deal massive super break damage. I'll be discussing her kit, builds, Lightcones, and possible teams. Just as a quick disclaimer though, the footage and information shown is from the creator experience server, so some things could still change when her banner drops. Let's start with her talent, Fortune Follows Where Virtue Spreads, which does a couple of things. First, as long as Fugue is alive, the enemy is inflicted with a Cloud Flame Luster debuff, which is an Exo Toughness meter equaling to 40% of their max toughness. For those unfamiliar with what Exo Toughness is, it's basically just another break meter that any unit can break regardless of element, and every time you deplete it, it deals an instance of break damage, which of course is really good for units like Boothill who deal most of their damage through break damage triggers. Aside from this, she also enables the entire party to deal super break damage to broken enemies as long as she's in the field. This is one of the only two abilities in the game that can enable the entire party to deal super break damage, the other of course being the Harmony MC. The cool thing is, both of their abilities do stack, so they both can be used together in super break comps. But I'll have a more detailed comparison between the two later in the video. Moving on to her skill, Virtue Beckons Bliss, which is a single target buff that does a couple of things. First, it grants the target the Foxy and Prayer buff, which increases their break effect by 30% and allows them to reduce toughness regardless of element, with all of their attacks dealing 50% of the original toughness reduction to non-weak enemies. Sadly, this does not stack with similar abilities with weakness ignoring toughness reduction like Rappa's and Firefly's enhanced skills. But it does stack with various abilities like weakness break efficiencies from Rowan May's skill and Boothill's toughness reduction bonus from his talent. But the neat thing about the skill is that when combined with the super break damage from her talent, it can essentially turn a lot of units into super break DPSs that don't have to worry about enemy weakness type. And thanks to this ability, there's a certain healer that became even more insane. But we'll talk about her later. Aside from this, Fugue also enters the Torrid Flame state, which enhances her basic attacks into blast attacks, and lets Fugue inflict an 18% defense shred on opponents whenever the unit with Foxy and Prayer attacks an enemy. This defense shred from this skill stacks with other sources of defense shred and synergizes well with defense ignore, allowing for massive break damage. Sadly, the enhanced basic attacks will only break fire weak enemies unless you use her skill on herself, but at least it's good for generating SP and breaking fire weak enemies while her Torrid Flame state is up. Speaking of which, the Torrid Flame state and the Foxy and Prayer buff only last for 3 of Fugue's turns, denoted by this counter that ticks down every time she takes a turn. But moving on to her ult, Solar Splendor shines upon all, which deals a massive fire AoE on all enemies. The neat thing about this ult is that it not only reduces enemy toughness regardless of weakness type, but its toughness reduction does not lose effectiveness even if you're attacking non-fire weak enemies. Meaning, it will always reduce a minimum of 20 toughness on any enemy regardless of weakness type. This makes this ability really good for helping your DPS break enemies that aren't weak to their element. So running an ER rope to spam her ult more often is actually not a bad idea. And finally, her technique, Recipient Shine. This ability just inflicts daze on enemies in the overworld, meaning they won't attack you. And if you attack these enemies, it applies the same 18% defense shred as her skill to every enemy in the field. But for ability priority, I recommend leveling her talent first, then her skill, then her ult, and finally basic attack. As for Fugue's bonus abilities, her first one gives the entire party a 6% break effect buff every time an enemy is broken, stacking up to 2 for a total of 12%. But if Fugue has a minimum of 220% break effect, this buff gets boosted to 18% per stack, capping at a 36% DE buff. As for her second ability, Sylvan Enigma, it gives her a permanent 30% bonus break effect and recovers 1 skill point after using her skill for the first time in battle, which is pretty good since it does help her reach her BE stat goal while simultaneously making the setup at the start of combat a bit less hassle because of the 1 SP refund. As for her last ability, it gives an enemy a 15% action delay every time they get weakness broken. With her Exo Toughness, this essentially becomes a 30% action delay, which is pretty good for helping your team get more turns to deal super break damage. And it synergizes really well with the Harmony MCs or Ruan May's own action delay, allowing you to delay the enemy's actions by a significant amount if you use them together. With her kit out of the way, we can talk about her Eidolons. Her E1 gives a bonus 50% break effect to whoever has the Fox and Prayer buff from her skill, meaning her skill now gives 80% bonus break effect instead of 30, which of course is pretty good for massive break damage and meeting break effect stat requirements. while her E2 regens 3 energy for Fugue every time an enemy is broken, and her ult now advances every ally's actions by 24% whenever it's used. This of course increases her utility, allowing allies to have more turns for dealing damage. But her E2 also has insane synergy with the Thief set, especially in Pure Fiction, essentially giving her tons of energy from all the enemies she can break, allowing her to spam her ult more often. And you can take the setup even further by giving her either one of these light cones, since they also give her quite a bit of energy from their passives. As for her E4, it increases the break damage dealt by 20% for whoever has the Foxy and Prayer buff from her skill. There's nothing really too much to say about it, except it helps your break DPS deal big PP damage. And finally, her E6 increases Fugue's own break effect by 50%, and while she's in her torrent state, Foxy and Prayer now affects every ally instead of just one. This allows your entire team to basically ignore type weakness, allowing you to break enemies much faster, while also letting them benefit from Foxy and Prayer's 80% BE buff and 20% increased break damage, essentially increasing overall team damage output. With our Eidolons out of the way, let's talk about Lightcones. Fugue's gorgeous signature gives her a bonus 60% break effect, and whenever an enemy is broken, it also has a chance to inflict the Charring debuff, which increases their break damage taken by 18%, stacking up to 2 times. This light cone makes it easier for you to reach Fugue's 220 BE stat goal, and with her Exo Toughness, you can easily get 2 stacks of this light cone's debuff as long as you break the enemies completely, which of course helps your allies deal massive break damage. Solitary Healing is a decent free-to-play 5-star alternative. It gives Fugue 40% break effect at S5, which is pretty good for helping her reach her 220 BE stat goal. Sadly, the DOT damage bonus is pretty much useless for Fugue, but since she does inflict the DOT when breaking enemies, she can still benefit from this LC's bonus 6 energy whenever an enemy with her DOT dies. You just have to make sure it's Fugue who breaks the enemy, which isn't too hard to do with her ult, especially in Pure Fiction. And like I said earlier, this LC does have synergy with her E2 and the Thief set, especially in Pure Fiction, allowing her to get tons of energy to spam her ult. Jiaocho's Light Cone is also another usable 5-star option. It gives her 60% effect hit rate, which pretty much guarantees her debuff lands on most enemies as long as you can get 1 or 2 effect hit rate substat rolls. Aside from this, it also gives a 10% damage vulnerability debuff, which gets increased to 24% when Fugue applies a DOT whenever she breaks an enemy. And this damage vulnerability debuff is pretty beneficial for break teams since it does improve the damage of breaks and super breaks. While her best 4-star option would be Pearls of Sweat. This LC lets her inflict the enemy with a 12 to 16% defense shred depending on its refinement. Of course, this stacks with her own defense shred, allowing her to inflict 48 to 52% defense shred in total to enemies, allowing her allies to deal massive damage. Sadly, this LC does not give bonus BE, so you have to invest in more BE substats or run a BE rope. Before the tutorial mission is also a really decent free-to-play option. It gives her up to 40% effect hit rate, which combined with an effect hit rate body, pretty much guarantees you'll land her defense shred on any enemy. Aside from this, it also gives her 8 energy every time she hits an enemy with a defense shred debuff, which most of the time she'd do anyway. And like I said earlier, this LC has insane synergy with her M2 and the Thief set, especially in Pure Fiction, allowing her to use her ult more often. And Fermata is also a usable free-to-play option, which gives her up to a 32% bonus break effect just by equipping it. Sadly, this LC is only a break effect stat stick since its passive is more DOT focused. With that being said though, I still believe Solitary Healing and Tutorial are better free-to-play options, so only consider this if those are already being used. But with her light cones out of the way, let's look at possible relics. Sadly, the Watchmaker set doesn't work on her since her ult is an attacking skill. But with that being said, what are her best relic sets? Iron Cavalry would be her best option for improving her personal break and super break damage, with its bonus break effect helping her reach her 220 stat goal, and its 4-piece stat bonus allowing her to ignore up to 25% of the enemy's defense for massive break and super break damage. But just note, you need 250 BE in battle to get all of its effects. Thief is also a good option for lots of break effect, but I also recommend it for Pure Fiction due to it giving Fugue 3 energy every time she breaks an enemy, which allows her to get her ult very consistently due to the sheer amount of trash enemies she can break with her ult in Pure Fiction. And as I kept yapping about earlier, the set also has insane synergy with her M2, the Tutorial Mission LC, and the Solitary Healing Light Cone, allowing her to get tons of energy to spam her ult to help your DPS break enemies. And as usual, 2-piece combos are great options for supports, giving her beneficial stats like BE or speed. Just pick whichever one works the best for you. As for planar sets, for Firefly break comps, Forge is probably her best option, with Firefly allowing her to get its 40% BE buff 100% of the time due to her fire weakness implant. However, if you're not running her with Firefly, I would only recommend it if there are a lot of fire weak enemies. Otherwise, it's pretty unreliable, and it's comparable to not even having a set bonus without having fire weak enemies. Talia is probably her best general use option outside of Firefly comps. It gives her up to 36% bonus break effect, which is pretty good for meeting her 220 BE stat goal. Just note, you need 145 speed to get its full benefits, which isn't too hard to get since Fugue already has 141 speed with speed boots alone. You can also use an energy regen set like Von Whack and Penacony to help get her ult a bit faster. But I would only really recommend this if you can reliably hit her 220 BE stat goal in battle. With her possible sets out of the way, let's talk about stats. Looking at all her stats and traces, she actually gains 54% BE naturally, which makes getting that 220 BE requirement easier. And she also has a very high 116 speed with her traces and base stats combined, so make sure to consider those when building. For main stats, you want an effect hit rate chest, speed boots, BE or energy rope, and an HP or defense orb for bulk. A BE rope would be the best option if you're having trouble reaching the 220 BE stat goal in battle, which can be the case if you're not running a break effect light cone. But in my opinion, if you can already reach this no problem, an energy rope is her best option since Fugue doesn't really need more than 220 break effect. An energy rope would let her spam her ult more often, meaning more frequent and faster weakness breaks, resulting in more opportunities for your team to deal super break damage. As for substats, you want to focus on break effect first, then speed until you reach your desired breakpoint, then effect hit rate, and finally HP or defense for bulk. Like I kept yapping about, she needs 220 BE to get the full benefits from her major trace, 250 if you're running Iron Cavalry. But it's not too difficult to reach this in battle since her team can give her a lot of BE from sources like her trace, relic and planar set bonuses, Rowan Mei, and the Harmony Trailblazer. As for speed goals, with speed boots alone, she already has 141 speed, which is already pretty high. So if you want, you can just call it a day and aim for the 143 speed breakpoint. But my recommendation is to at least go for 160 speed to give her lots of turns for SP and ult energy generation. With this, she can spam more ults to help her DPS break enemies faster, while also making SP management a bit easier, which is pretty good since some break comps can struggle with SP. Fugue also needs a bit of effect hit rate for her debuffs. My personal recommendation is to have around 60 to 70 effect hit rate, which should be enough to guarantee her debuffs land on just about any enemy. And it shouldn't be too hard to reach this with an effect hit rate chest and a few effect hit rate substats. But with her build out of the way, let's move on to possible teammates. The motherfucking Galaxy Ranger Boothill is probably one of Fugue's best DPS partners right now. Fugue gives Boothill so many benefits. First of all, thanks to her buff's weakness ignore combined with his increased toughness reduction, it allows him to break non-physical weak enemies without his ult's physical weakness implant. But the thing Boothill mainly benefits from is Fugue's exo toughness. Not only does it give him more break damage procs, but it also allows him to ramp up his pocket trick shots a lot faster, while also resulting in more ults due to his trace. And by faster, I mean he can have full stacks of pocket trick shot by the first turn as long as you can kill your target. Meaning, you can have a fully powered up Boothill by turn 1. Which is insane since previously you can only do that if he had his E1. Rappa, the ninja rapper of the Galaxy Rangers, is also another one of her best partners. Sadly, she doesn't really benefit much from Fugue's weakness ignore, but instead, she mainly benefits from Fugue's exo toughness. The double break triggers allows Rappa to essentially get double of her talent's charges from enemies, meaning she gains 2 charges from one normal enemy and 4 from any elite or higher. Which is insane since it basically allows Rappa to reach higher stacks of her talent, allowing for more damage even in content with less enemies. A super break Himiko also greatly benefits from Fugue. Just like Rappa, Fugue's exo toughness allows Himiko to get double charges from one enemy, allowing for more follow-ups. In addition to this, she also benefits greatly from Fugue's weakness ignore, allowing her to be used even in non-fire weak pure fiction stages. And of course, she enables her to deal super break damage. And since we're talking about break DPSs, we can't leave out best girl Firefly. She's also a very good teammate for Fugue. Firefly's fire weakness implant allows Fugue to take advantage of the Forge set while also letting her enhanced basics become a bit more useful in breaking enemies. Sadly, Fugue's super break multipliers aren't as high as the Harmony Trailblazers, so Firefly's super break damage doesn't benefit as much from Fugue as compared to the Harmony MC. However, Fugue makes up for this by giving her more break damage procs with Exo Toughness, resulting in more regular break damage. And she is a bit more comfy to use since she can generate more SP, which is really good for E0 Fireflies. Aside from this, you can also use her with other break DPSs like a Break March, Shui Yi, and Sushang. As for supports you can run with her, Ruan Mei of course is probably the best one, with Ruan Mei's weakness break efficiency offsetting the 50% reduced toughness reduction when attacking non-weak enemies with Fugue's weakness ignore buff, basically allowing your DPS to break enemies really fast regardless of element. Additionally, if you combine their action delays, you can delay an enemy's actions by a significant amount to the point that they might not be able to act before your DPS kills them, which of course opens up the possibility of running sustainless teams if you have them together. The Harmony MC is also a good unit to run alongside her. Their super break damage buffs do stack, so running both of them together can enable huge super break damage. Plus Fugue's Exo Toughness break procs ends up giving lots of energy to our MC, allowing for more ults, since they do get bonus energy every time an enemy is broken, which is insane for giving your team turns if the HMC has Dance Dance Dance. And just like Fugue, the HMC also delays enemies' actions whenever they're broken. So with them together, you can delay an enemy's actions significantly, which again opens up the possibility of running sustainless teams. Speaking of sustains, her best options are Linksha and Gallagher, with their break damage increasing debuffs working in tandem with Fugue's own supportive capabilities. But Linksha is way better because she has way more synergy with Fugue when played as a super break DPS. Not only does Fugue allow Linksha to deal massive break and super break damage, but with her weakness ignore, she also allows her to be used as a break DPS and non-fire weak content. It's actually quite funny just how good this combo is, especially if you add Sunday into the mix. But I'll show that later in the team showcase. And finally, for those asking if she'd work with Acheron, since she is a Nihility unit after all, the answer is only if you have absolutely no one else. Yes, her defense shred does help Acheron deal more damage and charge her ult, but that's the only benefit she brings Acheron. At the end of the day, Fugue is a break support, so unless you want to run a super break Acheron, it's not worth pulling Fugue for Acheron since you can use budget options like Pelo or Gwenaipen, since that essentially enable Acheron to deal similar damage for a fraction of the cost. With her possible teammates out of the way, let's cook up some teams. A really good break team to run is a Boothill break comp with Fugue, Sunday, or E1 Bronya, and the Flex. The Flex being another break support like HMC or Ruan Mei, a sustain like Linksha or Gallagher, or a debuffer like Pela. Fugue enables Boothill to quickly charge his pocket trick shots, which allows him to deal more damage from the get-go, which is really useful because it allows him to get through the beginning waves of MOC stages a lot faster, especially when combined with action advancers like Sunday or Bronya. And as you can see from the skill issue-ridden gameplay in the background, this comp really has no trouble clearing the harder stages of MOC, with Boothill just absolutely nuking every enemies due to all the break triggers he gets from Fugue's Exo Toughness. The neat thing is, even if you don't really need physical weakness to break enemies with this comp, the extra break triggers allows Boothill to get more energy to spam his ult due to his A6 trace, giving him 10 energy per stack of pocket trick shot, which is quite handy when fighting non-physical weak bosses since you can break them faster, allowing you to deal more damage. This is really useful in Apocalyptic Shadow since you often have to break multiple enemies to get the damage bonuses in that game mode. Speaking of which, you can also use this comp rather effectively in Apocalyptic Shadow since Boothill can delete and break bosses really easily, resulting in rather quick runs for lots of points. Another really good team is a Rappa Super Break comp. You can run this comp with either a sustain or without one to make room for both the HMC and Ruan Mei or a debuffer like Pela. The neat thing about this comp is that due to all the action delays this team can inflict, you won't really need a sustain because all the enemies will probably die before they get the chance to act, given that you break them first of course. And having multiple damage enabling supports, combined with a fast charge gain from Fugue's Exo Toughness, it enables Rappa to deal massive amounts of single and AoE break and super break damage. This comp is viable in just about any game mode, but of course it performs the best in Pure Fiction, with Rappa absolutely having no trouble achieving 40k runs. Sadly, in my opinion, this comp is still kinda limited to imaginary weak content since Rappa doesn't really have access to imaginary weakness implants or something similar to Boothill's bonus toughness reduction, meaning she's still stuck only dealing 50% toughness reduction to non-imaginary weak opponents. Of course, Fugue using her ult does help with this problem, helping Rappa break non-imaginary weak enemies easier. So my suggestions for this comp is for you to run Fugue with lots of energy sources like the tutorial LC or Von Whack, so she can spam her ult way more often if you plan to run it in non-imaginary weak content. But nonetheless, this team is still amazing. And of course, you can always just run her in a Firefly comp as a replacement or partner for the Harmony Trailblazer. At this point, we're already familiar of Firefly's insane damage capability, so I won't go into too much detail about it because I've yapped enough already. But even if you decide to replace the Harmony MC in this team, it has no trouble clearing MOC, and it can brute force most content in the game due to Firefly's weakness implant, allowing Fugue to break enemies easier with their enhanced basics. I personally found this comp a bit more comfier to run at E0 compared to the version with the Harmony Trailblazer. This is of course due to Fugue being better at SP generation, so I don't really have to worry about SP management even with Lingsha in the team. And if you're worried about Firefly's super break damage output due to Fugue's lower super break multipliers, I barely even notice a big difference in overall damage and clear times. This is because Fugue makes up for this lower multiplier by boosting Firefly's overall damage with her defense shreds, while simultaneously allowing for more break triggers from Exo Toughness, meaning more normal break damage. So TLDR, Firefly would still do devastating damage with this comp. But another really fun team you can run her in is a Lingsha main DPS super break comp with Sunday in the flex, which does a lot of damage and is actually rather viable in every endgame game mode. And since Lingsha is a healer at the end of the day, this comp enables you to run another support other than Sunday and Fugue in the flex spot to help improve Lingsha's own break damage, with break supports of course being preferred. Lingsha has no trouble breaking enemies, even with the 50% reduced toughness when attacking non-fire weak enemies with Fugue's weakness ignore buff, due to the sheer amount of turns Sunday gives her and Fu Yuan to break the enemy. And with Fugue's exo toughness, it also gives Lingsha more break triggers to deal massive damage, allowing you to finish tougher opponents easier. And since a lot of Lingsha's teammates in this team don't really use too much SP, you have free reign to spam her skill as much as you want without really worrying about SP management, which of course results in more Fu Yuan turns, resulting in faster weakness breaks and massive amounts of break damage. I found this comp is actually able to clear just about any endgame content, but of course, just like the Rappa comp, it performs the best in pure fiction, with Lingsha's massive and frequent super break nukes allowing for easy 40k runs. This team quickly became one of my favorite teams in the game just because I find the notion of turning healers into viable DPSs that do big PP damage super funny. You can basically think of Fugue as the last Infinity Stone Lingsha needed to become even more of an erudition DPS than she already is. I guess Lingsha really puts the harm in healer. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Anyway, moving on. And lastly, I wanted to showcase a budget and almost completely free-to-play Super Break Himiko comp. Given that you get Himiko and Gallagher from one of the character selectors, this team is accessible to just about anyone. Just like Rappa, Himiko gets double charges due to Fugue's exo toughness. And if you combine this with Fugue's weakness ignore, it makes getting her FUAs easier and faster, which is perfect for dealing high amounts of super break damage or breaking lots of enemies in pure fiction. It's actually quite funny since a lot of the time you'd be locked into watching Himiko's follow-up animation due to the sheer amount of FUAs resulting from chain breaking enemies with either her follow-ups, punches attacks, or Fugue's ult. And if you're worrying about this team's performance, this comp can easily achieve high scores in pure fiction despite being super accessible and budget friendly. But some people might not have all of these characters, so here are some alternative break comps you can run with Fugue with some budget-friendly options included. Now, these may not perform as well as our best comps, but they should be able to clear content just fine. But now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Fugue versus Trailblazer. The Harmony MC can use the Watchmaker set. They provide a bigger super break damage multiplier, a bigger break effect buff, while also being able to provide the team with more turns due to Dance Dance Dance, all on top of them being a free accessible unit. While yes, Fugue may have a lower super break damage multiplier and a smaller break effect buff, she makes up for it in utility. Her weakness ignores allows more versatility for lots of break units and comps, making them more usable even in non-elemental weak content. Her defense shred and exo toughness enables units to not only deal more break damage, but it also enables the kit of break-reliant units like Boot Hill, Rappa, and Himiko to become even more insane. Plus, she generates more SP for comfier gameplay because of her being super fast and basic attacking all the time, which if you played some break comps before, you'd know that SP management can become a bit of a problem, especially in some Boot Hill or easier Firefly comps with Lingsha. And the icing on top of the cake is, she's also not super reliant on type weakness to break enemies because of her ult, which also happens to deal massive break damage. damage, meaning she can help break opponents faster so your DPS has more opportunities to deal super break damage. So in my opinion, just from utility alone, Fugue is better. But it's not like having both is bad. It's actually really good. Like I said earlier, both of their buffs can stack, so you can use them together in comps just in case you don't have someone like Ruan Mei. Aside from this, having both also enables you to run 2 super break comps in endgame content, which is pretty good especially for people who like the break playstyle, or people who have a lot of break DPSs. But that's about it because I'm beginning to lose my voice. But there's just one last question. Is she a must pull? It depends on the state of your account. If you don't have any break DPSs, not really. At the end of the day, she is a break support, meaning she loses a lot of value if she has no one to support. She's not a must pull either if you're already satisfied with having the HMC as your sole super break support and have no plans to ever have them leave the Harmony path. In both cases, it's much better to roll someone who'd benefit your account more. And with the 3.x characters and Fate collab coming, it might not be a bad idea to start saving your Jades for characters that might interest you more. However, she is definitely a must-pull if you're lacking a break support to support your break DPSs. She would not only elevate any break team's performance and damage with her utility, she also makes break units a bit more versatile, allowing you to tackle a lot more harder content. It's also worth noting that the only other super break enabler we have is the Harmony MC, and with them getting their new Remembrance path, super break comps will be left without a key support if you want to play around with the Trailblazer's new path and you don't have Fugue. Now, you can always switch the Trailblazer back to the Harmony on the fly. So it only really becomes a problem if you plan to use super break comps at the same time as Remembrance Trailblazer teams and endgame content. I'm mainly saying this since it might influence some people's pulling decisions. But at the end of the day though, if you like Fugue, roll for her. I'm personally doing so just because if the length of this video isn't already a telling sign, I've been a Tinyu fan since day one. And I really love her new design. I mean, look at her tails look so floofy. But just make sure to tell me what you think about her in the comments below, and don't forget to hit me with a like and a sub.